So when you hear the word mussels, a lot of you might be picturing something that looks a little bit like this. And even though that's what you might be familiar with, today we're not going to be talking about mussels of the sea, but we're going to be talking about freshwater mussels, which, like their seawater counterparts, are bivalves, which means that they are animals that have a pair of hinged shells. And although you and I cannot eat them, they are excellent sources of food for wildlife, and they are very long-lived, with some species having been recorded to live up to 70 years. So the life cycle of mussels are very interesting, and they start with the adult female releasing her fertilized larvae into the water column, and they are called glochidia at this point. And they cannot, at this point, exist in the water by themselves. They must attach themselves to a host fish, where they attach to the gills of a fish. And throughout the next several weeks, they will develop and metamorphosize into juvenile mussels. And they drop off the fish without harming the fish and bury themselves into the sediment. And thus, the cycle starts all over again. So mussels are excellent bioindicators, and some of the characteristics they have that make them such good bioindicators is that they're filter feeders. So all the water that they are taking in, they might have pollutants, and there's no way for them to avoid that as they're eating. And they also will bioaccumulate any toxins that might be in this water. So if they're sensitive to these pollutants, they can't avoid that. They're also immobile, so unlike fish, which might be able to swim away from hazards, mussels cannot swim away. And they kind of act as living historians because different phases of the mussels are have different tolerances to pollutants. So adults tend to be hardier than the glochidia or the juvenile. So if you see a population with only adults, that indicates that there might be pollutants that aren't killing the adults but are killing the juveniles or glochidia. But if you find a healthy reproducing population, that means that your water is likely healthier than other bodies of water might be. And unfortunately, we are losing mussels. Of the 300 native species in North America, over 30 of them have gone extinct, with just 8 of those being declared extinct in 2023. And one of the places that we know that there are mussels native is the Darby Creek, which is located in the Delaware River watershed. And there is estimated to be approximately 500,000 people that live in this watershed. And this creek is characterized by development, land use, and industrialization. And it's also known for having very poor water quality. And due to this poor water quality, we believe that there are no mussels that exist here. Starting in 2021, the Darby and Cobb's Creek Community Science Program was started, and this is a 100% volunteer-driven program, and the volunteers mostly focus on conductivity and chloride. And all of their data is publicly available, and you could check it out at this website or this QR code. And in 2022, one of these volunteers found living mussels in the Darby Creek. And this was a big shock. People didn't believe this volunteer, but once it was confirmed that this was indeed a living mussel, they did surveys in 2024 and 2025 to get an idea of what the populations of mussels are like in the Darby Creek. So what they found was a super healthy reproducing population right here. However, right next to this, you can see this unnamed tributary, and no mussels were found there whatsoever. And right after these two bodies of water meet, you can see an immediate decline in mussel population. However, if you continue to look downstream, you can see this unnamed tributary too. And after these two bodies of water meet, we can see that there is an increase in mussel population once again. So chloride conductivity, what are they? Why are we looking at this? Chloride is a compound that contains a negatively charged anion, and these are carriers for electrical currents. So an example of a chloride salt is sodium chloride, which is the main type of salt used in road salt. And conductivity is a measure of the ability of the water to pass an electrical current. And in theory, these two measurements should be directly correlated with each other. And if we look back at community science data, we see that there is a very strong correlation between these two measurements. And if you guys remember, there was a giant snowstorm recently, and followed by extremely cold weather for what seemed like an eternity. But as soon as the temperature got low enough or warm enough that we could go out and do some sampling, we found that the chloride and conductivity levels at 5 sample sites within this region were all elevated above ideal levels. But what I want to point out is at this sample site, which is located on that first unnamed tributary that I mentioned earlier with no mussels, was extremely elevated. And in contrast, although still above ideal levels, this other sample site, which is found on that second unnamed tributary, was relatively low compared to this first one. And although we can see from those previous graphs that there might be seasonal concerns with chloride, if we look back at historical data over the years, we can see that conductivity over time is always an issue, no matter what time of the year. So what we've learned from this data is that all 5 of our sites have high chloride levels. However, this unnamed tributary is a particular site of interest for when it comes to restoration efforts. And the second unnamed tributary seems to have relatively higher water quality that might be allowing these mussels to rebound. And this is learning what allows this water to be of higher quality could be essential for future efforts. And lastly, we know that road salt is harmful and it is polluting our creek. So you might be wondering what you can do to help mussels in the future. And one thing that you can do is limit your winter salt application. So you can just double check how much you actually need. A lot of people might accidentally overuse. Once the snow and ice has melted, you can sweep up any excess that might be left. And you can also contact your local municipality, report large piles of road salt and request that they be taken care of. You can contact your representatives to support legislation that supports responsible road salt application. And you can also volunteer. So you can volunteer for this program that I talked about in this talk, or you can also volunteer for a local one, because at the end of the day, all of this work that I talked about today was started from the discovery of one volunteer. Thank you.